Elara hadn't known the silence of sleep in months. Ever since her grandmother passed, the night had become her enemy, a vast ocean of darkness where sharp-toothed nightmares dragged her into the depths. Grief was a heavy cloak by day, but at night it morphed into a monster. When her grandmother's lawyer presented her with a sole inheritance, a single, ornate, antique music box, Elara felt a pang of disappointment. Made of dark, polished wood with intricate carvings of vines and night-blooming flowers, it was beautiful, but it felt like a fragile comfort for an all-consuming pain. That night, exhausted from her own mind, she placed it on her bedside table. Her fingers traced the cool carvings before, on an impulse, she wound the small brass key. A melody she'd never heard before filled the room. It wasn't cheerful, nor was it overtly sad. It was a haunting, ethereal lullaby, each note hanging in the air like dust in a moonbeam. The tune washed over her, and for the first time in ages, Elara fell asleep without a fight, and she did not dream. The morning came, crisp and quiet. The peace was so profound, so unusual, it startled her. The next night, she wound the box again, and again. The lullaby became her ritual, her shield against the horrors of the night. The nightmares vanished completely. In their place was a dreamless, empty sleep. She began to feel a presence in the room with her, a shadow in the corner of her eye, a stillness that felt watchful and protective. It wasn't menacing. On the contrary, it felt like a silent guardian, warding off the demons that plagued her. Elara was grateful. She started to feel better. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She smiled more. But then, the gaps began. Small things at first. She went to make her favorite breakfast, the one her grandmother used to make on birthdays, and she paused, hand on the cupboard, unable to recall the recipe. She could picture her grandmother in the kitchen, but her face was blurred, the sound of her laugh a distant echo. She wrote it off as stress, as grief. A week later, she ran into a friend who brought up the first concert they ever went to, a moment she had always cherished. As he described the energy of the crowd, the music thumping in their chests, Elara just stared at him. She remembered being there, but the emotion, the pure joy of that moment was gone. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger. Panic began to creep in. The presence in her room grew more defined. The shadow was no longer peripheral. It was a tall, slender shape that would materialize in the darkness, a silhouette made of smoke and silence. Her guardian, as she'd taken to calling it in her head, seemed to be growing, getting stronger. The stronger it got, the more her waking life lost its color. Rummaging through her grandmother's belongings for answers, Elara found an old, cracked leather diary. The early entries were full of life, describing love, family, and joy. Then the tone shifted. Her grandmother mentioned the music box, a family gift passed down to protect against nightly sorrows. But the words grew increasingly desperate. "The silent thief visited again tonight," she wrote. "It took the day I learned to ride my bike. I remember the bike, the street, but not the feeling of the wind, my father's pride. It steals the color from memories, leaving only gray outlines." A chill ran down Elara's spine. The final entry was scrawled, the handwriting nearly illegible. "It is hungry. The piece has a price. Do not let it starve, but do not let it feast on you." That night, Elara stared at the music box in horror. The beautiful relic now looked like a cage, a tomb. Her guardian, her protector, was a parasite, the silent thief. It wasn't just consuming her nightmares, it was devouring her happiness for fuel. She resolved not to wind the key. She would face the nightmares. But what came wasn't a normal nightmare. She was back at her own 6th birthday party, a memory that now felt vague to her. But this time, it was twisted. Her friends had blank, eyeless faces. The birthday cake was crawling with insects. And in the middle of it all stood the guardian, its shadowy form overlaying everything, showing her what it had taken and corrupted. She woke up screaming, her heart hammering. The shadow figure was at the foot of her bed, more solid than ever before. It didn't seem menacing, but hungry, desperate. A feeling washed over her mind, not in words, but in pure emotion. The terror that awaited her in the dark, the pain the entity was sparing her from, and the gnawing hunger that drove it. It was an impossible choice. A life of empty peace, stripped of every happy moment that made her who she was, or a life of torment, haunted by nightmares, but with her soul intact. She looked at the box, then at the shadow. Destroying it felt like the only answer. But her grandmother's words echoed, "Do not let it starve." What would happen if a creature like this starved? Would it turn on her with its full force? In a moment of desperate clarity, a terrible, dangerous idea formed. If the creature fed on emotion, on memories, perhaps she could change its diet. The next night, Elara sat on her bed, her heart heavy with dread. She wound the key. The haunting melody began. But this time, she didn't empty her mind. She focused. She forced herself to relive the worst pain of her life. She remembered the phone call telling her about her grandmother's accident. She felt the tidal wave of shock, denial, the agony that split her in two. She drowned herself in the grief, offering it up to the darkness. The shadow figure faltered. It recoiled, as if burned. But the hunger was stronger. Slowly, hesitantly, the entity drew closer. Elara felt a lightness, not of joy, but as if a weight was being subtly lifted. The sharp pain of her memory didn't vanish, but its cutting edge was smoothed away. It became a nightly ritual. Elara fed her guardian her pain, her anxieties, her fears, her loneliness, her grief. It was exhausting, an act of emotional self-flagellation, but it was working. Slowly, like the morning sun burning through fog, the color started to return to her happy memories. One day, she found herself humming the song from that first concert, and she smiled. She remembered her grandmother's recipe, and the smell of cinnamon filled her memory. The figure in her room didn't disappear, but it changed. It was less imposing, more ethereal, a contented shadow rather than a starving predator. They had reached a fragile truce. Elara wasn't free. She was a warden, carrying a dark symbiont that fed on her pain. But in exchange, she got her life back. She slept in silence, no longer in a void, but in a hard-won calm. The music box remained on her nightstand, a constant reminder that to keep her joy, she had to revisit her pain every single night, offering up a piece of her broken heart to keep the silent thief satisfied. This story was a presentation from Shadow Tales.